uh, which I'm been really excited since I spoke to the group a couple of weeks ago before this presentation. So I'm really excited to introduce this group. Um, First and foremost, I'll introduce the panelists. Lisa Wilding Brown is the Chief Research Officer at Innovate. She has been in the industry since the inception of online research. Her specialties include sampling and survey design, panel development and management, online and mobile recruitment, as well as full service mixed mode field management. As the CRO of Innovate, Lisa is responsible for panel quality, best practices, and sampling methodologies, as well as spearheading the firm's DIY platform. She's an industry veteran, and I heard Lisa speak on data quality a couple of weeks ago, so I'm excited for her contribution. Second panelist is Damion Taylor. Damion is the founder of Prometheus Digital Studio, a LA-based firm that uses scientific method to deconstruct and rebuild the creative process to only focus on what truly provides value for audiences. Damion spent the past 15 years applying data and technology to entertainment, both analytical and creative. He brings a unique skill set that's in high demand for brands and media companies. He has led audience development for large traditional media companies, such as Warner Brothers and NBC Universal, as well as innovative digital leaders like Machinima, MeToo, and New Forum. The third panelist, who is unfortunately on vacation, not unfortunate for her, but unfortunate for us, is Michaela Mora. Michaela is a mixed method qual-quant researcher, founder of Relevant Insights in 2007. She's been working for more than 20 years at the intersection of market research and insights, CX and UX. She has experience from both the client side and supplier side in industries such as entertainment, technology, retail, automotive, CPG, travel. She runs the gamut across sectors and industries. We were able to get some video content from Michaela today, which the group will be sharing. But I heard Michaela speak about a month ago as well, and I'm excited to hear what she has to add to this panel. Candance Hokett is a culture shaper and storyteller based in New York City. Throughout her 10 years in the industry, she has built a specialty for qualitative research methodologies from her background at Macy's, BET, and Refinery 29, which is a Vice Media brand. She challenges the norm to capture the voice of the multicultural consumer in efforts to help brands connect with their audience authentically. Her candor and relatable nature make her a trusted qual moderator and insights generated with brands in fashion, beauty, tech, and television and media. And last but not least is our panel moderator today, Kerry Edelstein. She's the president and founder of Research Narrative, a full-service market research and insights advisory agency. Kerry has advised dozens of renowned media and technology brands, including Netflix, YouTube, Amazon, NPR, and Viacom, to hybridize consumer insights with digital analytics, launch cross-platform media strategies, and build leading brand portfolios. She has been a featured speaker and insight storytelling workshop leader for SMR, the ARF, and QRCA, and a guest speaker on research design at both UCLA and USC. These individuals are a part of a collective, the Multicultural Insights Collective, which I'm sure Kerry and the group will discuss, and of which Jay Tucker, who was in the previous panel, is also a part of this group. So with that intro, I'm excited to turn that over to Kerry.
Thank you. What a wonderful introduction. And I will transition this by saying that Jay Tucker on the last panel actually invited me to speak in a market research class at UCLA, and we are in the process of onboarding a graduate intern from that class. So I definitely encourage everyone out there to go and guest speak, especially now when classes are virtual. And it's a great way to actually find really enthusiastic people who want to work in market research and maybe didn't know about it. But we are all part in this group of a collective called the Multicultural Insights Collective, and Jay from the last panel is part of that as well as 4 other people who are not on screen right now, including Michaela Mora, who we're going to hear from virtually today while she's, I think, leave on vacation somewhere in the California redwoods right now in a rustic spot without internet, but she did record some videos for us. So we're going to get to hear from her today. Just to give the audience a little bit of background on MIC, as we call ourselves, we're a collective of different veteran researchers, and most of us business owners, and most of us minority and women business owners, who kind of sat together and watched some of the social justice conversation happening last year, and we thought to ourselves, we really need to be part of addressing diversity and representation and active anti-racism, anti-discrimination activities in our own field. Like, let's look at our own house. And we got together and really started meeting literally every Friday from June 2020 through now to talk about how are we going to be part of the solution in this, and how can we create a more diverse ecosystem, not just for market research agencies, which a lot of us run, but also for clients across different industries. Now, several of us here do a lot of work in media, but some of the other members of our team work in areas like tech and CPG and retail, government. So we represent a lot of different sectors as well, and really wanted to bring our collective thinking to our different businesses and to our client businesses as well across different sectors. And I am personally a big believer that, you know, no matter how much I love my own business, and I do, I think you always learn a lot by working with other senior level business executives and business owners. And that's kind of the idea of MIC. And the work we're doing is to learn from each other and to knowledge share. So that's kind of our, I guess, our heartbeat in a way. We also recently launched a project called Voices of Equity, which is a series of studies around racial justice in business. And the first one is called Words Matter, which recently launched. If at the end of this all, what you've heard today is interesting to you, you can check that out at voicesofequity.com, or you can email us at info@voicesofequity.com. That goes to myself and Candance, who we're going to hear from in a minute. And Candance, you're on mute if you want to chime in on that, but we definitely want to encourage you guys at the end of this to continue the conversation with us. We are trying to really build a movement and a bigger ecosystem inside the market research industry. So with that, one of the things that was kind of the core tenet of this group we started was, although we all believe the diversity and representation are moral imperatives and ethical imperatives, we also believe that they're business imperatives and economic imperatives. And, you know I come from predominantly a media research background most recently, and there's all sorts of incredible case studies on different areas of the media industry that initially talked about diversity as a cause, and in some cases a pro bono cause. And there's so many case studies of that just not being true, whether it's the film industry and, for female leads, Pitch Perfect, or for mostly African-American casts, you have Black Panther, and basically the entire film and TV industry out of Atlanta. And if you go into public radio, which is another area I do a lot of work in, there's a phenomenal case study out of KPCC that talks about all their efforts to really engage the Hispanic audience. And it basically, this 5-year effort they went through created an increase in revenue on 3 different revenue generating areas. So sponsorships, corporate underwriting, etc., all went up when they did this. There was no economic negative impact, only positive impact. Yet decades had been spent thinking that this wasn't something that was an economic imperative. And I think there's all sorts of case studies to the contrary. And so we're going to start there. And I want to start by sharing a video. We asked all the team members to think about, what are some of the challenges with introducing, and some of the challenges, and by the way, the excuses you hear in introducing diversity and representation into the market research industry and into our client businesses. And Michelle had a wonderful video that I want to share with everybody here talking about that. Let me take 1 minute to pull that up. We're going to start with her, and then I will turn to the rest of the team. All right, everyone say a prayer to the internet and Zoom gods for this.
In my opinion, the most common challenges in implementing diversity and representation into our research and operations are, first, the lack of diversity in the C-suite and among decision makers on the client side. This leads to a narrow vision of market opportunities that focuses on product development and marketing design for the average majority. So there is no budget for research and development and marketing to diverse segments, even if they could be profitable. The second challenge going down the ladder is less diversity among corporate researchers and suppliers. This can impact survey and discussion guide design, sampling plans, and data interpretation due to familiarity bias, which confines you to what you're familiar with. This is also connected to a lack of representation of small and diverse research suppliers in the preferred supplier list. Finally, the third challenge is access to and affordability of sample sources with diverse populations. Recruitment of these populations require more resources from sample providers, and clients are often not willing to pay for it. So behind these three challenges, there is essentially a lack of vision and investment in people and resources to make diversity a reality at all levels. The most common excuse I hear for not addressing diversity in research is cost. The research costs too much. Marketing to these groups costs too much. And so there is no point in learning about them since the product or marketing strategy will not change or be customized for them. I consider the cost argument to be an excuse because what is really behind it is often a lack of perceived value. Companies that invest in diversity as a strategy for business growth and sustainability tend to value the insights that multicultural research brings. When the perceived value is there, the cost is less of a problem. The other excuse I hear for not doing multicultural research is usually related to misconceptions about the buying power of diverse groups. In 2019, the Seeley Center of Economic Growth, a unit of UGA's Terry College of Business, reported that minority groups had a combined buying power of $3.9 trillion. Hispanics alone were commanding $1.5 trillion in spending power, which is larger than the GDP of Australia. This is also an excuse because it's just a reflection of ignorance about these groups. So lack of perceived value, lack of understanding of diverse populations are behind the excuses to not learn about them.
Awesome. I couldn't have said it better. So I am going to turn it over to the team, and this ends my version of talking and my portion of it. I would love to turn over the team and both for reactions to what Michaela said and for you to weigh in on what are some of the challenges and excuses you run into in your careers and your roles in implementing diversity and representation in research and with clients as well.
Sure, I'll jump in. I think Michaela really, I think she articulated it wonderfully. I think it's similar excuses. A lot of what I've seen is the same excuse, just with a different dressing on it, right? Same thing of, well, if we do it, it'll only be Black people who do that. Or if we do this, it'll only be this group. There's that other piece of the assumption that no one cares to look at anything outside of their own group. And so the cost can't be there because we're only going to get that small audience, not understanding that there could be a universal or a broader appeal than what has been deemed valuable. I think the example you mentioned from media is Black Panther, right? For all intents and purposes, it should be classified as like you're a Black movie, right? There's, the token white character in that movie, but it performed like any other superhero movie. And for a lot of people, that was a wake-up call of, wait a minute, hold on. So there could still be a story that had this entirely brown, Black cast that appealed to people outside of a specific group. And so it's also the idea of everyone only cares about people who look or think like them. And there's actually lots of research that shows it's more about the universality and the connection. If I can identify with your story somehow, then I'm more likely to care about it, even if we don't look or behave similarly. But we just have to actually take the time to make those things visible to each other.
Yeah, I can jump in. I mean, first of all, it's great to see you guys, and thrilled to be here and have this opportunity. You know, as a sample provider, I've spent most of my career on the sample side of the industry, although I did start at a full service agency and just missed Kerry by a couple of years way back when. But I've been working with online samples for a really long time, and these are not new issues. The lack of representation has been something that we've been dealing with since I got involved in the industry nearly 20 years ago. You know, I think there's a lot of things to mention here, but for me, just having sat on this side of the industry for as long as I have, I think there's a big difference between people who are responsible for traffic acquisition versus people who are true sampling scientists. Those two things are very, very different. I'm not just going to come at you guys with problems. I will, you know, plan to address this with some solutions, but you know, I hear from a lot of clients just about the lack of representation in online panel sources. And I just want to give a little bit of context on why that's happening. First of all, I think there's just a lack of investment, right? It has not been a priority for sample companies to invest in proper representation of diverse cohorts. And I think the sort of assumption is, well, if we sample census rep, then we've ticked the box. I think our clients think that way, and I think sample providers think that way. And Michaela Mora and I talk a lot, and I'm thrilled to see her on that video. And she said to me a while back ago, she said, you know, if we're sampling census rep, we're sampling for a white majority. And if the base sizes that are executed against that sample frame are not large enough, then you're not even going to have a readable base for those diverse cohorts. So you're sort of behind before you've even started. And so we really have to kind of pull back the covers and really address the systemic issues that we have with the way that we do business, how we're prioritizing diverse audiences. And I think it really starts with education and understanding how the current sampling landscape is working. The sampling side of our industry has really progressed in terms of technology adoption over the last, call it 5 to 10 years. Back in the early days, it was very human driven, right? You'd get on a phone call or send an email addressing what you needed for your sample, and then off to the races you would be. But now it's all algorithmically driven, right? It's all programmatic and driven by API. And, you know, the publishing community that drives a lot of the sample in our space. And when I say sample, I mean human beings. I think that's the other piece too. There's a humanity that's been lost throughout the field and data collection process, which I'm sure we'll touch on a little bit later as well. And I think Audrey this morning, her keynote was just fantastic and really touched on that. I could see some of those direct translations from her story about, you know, in Hawaii and the folks that were living there and how they felt so disenfranchised and excluded. I think we need to be more mindful of how we're really including people, humans who participate in our surveys and not really refer to them as completes or respondents. It feels so.
You're correct.
Yes. But to sort of step back for just a moment, you know, our environment is so programmatic, right? We don't have that level of human intervention that we did before. There are two key metrics, EPC, earnings per click, I said it, and conversion rate. And when you have naturally lower incidence populations, there is a strain that's going to occur between supply and demand. And so if you leave it to the algorithms to do the heavy lifting for you, you're going to come out underrepresented. And so it really starts with having conversations with your sample providers, putting them in the hot seat, asking for documentation, and building out a really good strategy to ensure that your survey is adequately represented. So I've got some more solutions, but I'll hand it over to Candance.
I love what you're saying. I mean, it coincides with what Michaela was saying about the narrow vision and, you know, how that limits humanity behind the work. And for instance, specifically the limitations around the intent of the research to begin with, you know, aside from the sampling, what's being written, what's being discussed, how is it being approached? You know, we have to make sure that even as researchers ourselves doing custom work all the time, we are unbiased and that we keep, you know, our finger on the pulse that has a lens rooted in diversity. So just on a daily basis, we understand as researchers, what's the mission behind our marketing? What's the purpose behind the products that we're trying to put out? And, who is it serving? Because there's plenty of times where I've just worked on research projects that could have totally taken a lens to have a deeper dive into things like age, income, education, ethnicity, but we're just sticking to the surface level, diving into the business that might be speaking around, sales and how to drive those and increase those in the next season, but maybe not those nuances of where maybe geographically there are some cohorts that are doing or driving business even faster than other areas, and how we can limit our point of view just based upon the intent of coming in the project to begin with a particular goal in mind, and how we can just work together to make sure that within the creation process of these methodologies of the sampling, that we're keeping that thought process in mind. And I think that helps a lot when you don't limit yourself with multicultural researchers and partners. And, Michaela said this at the C-suite. It's really hard when your C-suite doesn't look like anyone that they would, correspond with when it comes to doing this work. And how can those bridges be gapped? I mean, these conferences really do help. But in addition to that, how is that being done, even at, just a holistic level within the, oops, sorry, I think I'm muted. By all means, none of us work in HR, but, we've each had issues with representation through what we've seen in recruitment and employment, in the same way we're talking about it on the sampling side is the same way we should be thinking about it when it comes to the work. And the way that I think an example recently, just in media, that even Kerry put our team onto, was to look at the merge between Joy Boluamini, I think I might be saying her name right, from Coded Bias, and how, she was having trouble finding, people to understand that the work that she was doing was uncovering how algorithms weren't really approaching diversity and the scale when it comes to even just facial recognition in an unbiased way, and how much that really does put a light on the familiarity bias when it comes to who's actually at the top building these systems, and who's employed in these areas. So, we did a teaser survey as a team. It was a while ago, but I was in the data, deep in the data as a support. And I remember the question we had, it had a few attitude statements to see which cohorts agreed to this. The biggest groups where there was, a response on not being a good fit when interviewing for a job was Black and Hispanic employees and Asian women. And it's really unsettling to hear that some of, the greatest BIPOC talent might be told time and time again for some of these roles that they might not be the best fit. And it's hard enough because maybe with school, recruitment, and access, they might not even be exposed to these types of careers at a certain, stage in their education that other areas or other schools or other ethnicity groups might be. So how are we missing out just by not starting the conversation sooner, recruiting sooner, not hiring sooner, and, diversifying who we work with and partner with? So yeah, I think it's even, at the lowest level, but even again at the highest level too.
And it's interesting to hear you and Michaela both brought the point about C-suite. And I think, there's a really important role for allies here. And I will say there is no shortage in either survey sampling or survey recruiting or in HR recruiting for white women over the age of 40 in market research. And I am one. I like white women over the age of 40, but we're everywhere, right? It's very easy to find women of my demographic to take surveys. And it's also easy to find us. I find it easy to find people like me in recruiting, but you bring up a really important point, which is that there actually has to be a very conscious effort to look outside your myopic world and not fall back on what we call cultural fit. Well, cultural fit can be, kind of code for discrimination, right? It's people who are already think and look like you. And that prevents you from having this broader worldview who could be out there. And I will just give about 150 plus ones to watching Coded Bias and to checking out AJL, the Algorithmic Justice League, which got linked in the comments here. Great movie and such an important group that Joy started. And those are great resources for understanding where we can be allies and advocates and to surface some of the things to bring up. And I think what Lisa brought up earlier, I will say as a buyer of sample is one of my biggest pain points. And a lot of times I hear sample companies make excuses to me that, well, there's just not the money there for us to make that investment. And I will tell them, I personally have several clients that want to make that investment and you don't have the feasibility for it. So that's really not true. That's an excuse. And you're going to have to think more broadly than earnings per click as a way of running your business, as a way of managing your business. Otherwise, you're not able to actually meet the demand that is out there. And economically, you're actually just leaving money on the table, both from a revenue standpoint, but from the economics of what all these clients are trying to do in growing their businesses. So it's actually kind of gives it this sort of corporate myopia. I want to, with that, pivot to solutions. And I am actually going to go back to Ms. Michaela and share what she had to say about different solutions in this space.
To address excuses for not delivering diversity in research, we first need to show the value of developing products and marketing strategies for diverse segments. As we do for many research projects, researchers advocating for multicultural research should start with secondary research. Take advantage of the data available and pinpoint opportunities in these segments that can persuade the C-suite to invest in them. Secondary research rarely gives us all the answers we need, so it can help make the case for doing primary multicultural research. Second, we all have biases, and the only way to keep them in check is to collaborate with people who can provide different perspectives. Companies need diverse corporate research teams and suppliers to demonstrate the value of diversity in research. However, this solution also requires investment in DEI and supply diversity programs. And third, sample providers in our industry need to invest in creating a higher supply of diverse populations for research to increase feasibility and lower cost. I know this is easier said than done, but the sustainability of our industry is at play. Diversity is here to stay.
I could really listen to her all day. So, I want to talk a little bit about, what do we do about this and the solutions? And certainly for everybody in this group, one of the things we're doing to create solutions is co-launching MIC in this collective that we've built and really trying to invite other people into it, but also disseminate the knowledge we're building as part of that. And then Candance mentioned, on our team at Research Narrative, we actually, as a company activity, had everybody watch Coded Bias. And then we had a team meeting to talk about what did we learn about bias and algorithms and facial recognition, all these things, and what does it mean for our business and how we need to operate as a business. And we had a whole team meeting about it. So I'd love to throw it to you guys about what are some of the solutions that you're implementing at work or that you believe need to be implemented in the market research industry at large to move towards a future of better diversity, inclusion, and representation.
Yeah, one of the things that I've seen a lot of lately, or that I've been working to really include in my work, has been in a single word, intentionality, right? But the first piece is not to take on the good enough, like, oh yeah, we have enough, that's it. But to go back every time I feel that phrase about to creep up in my mind, to go back and look at what is my objective for this? What do I really want to learn from this? And does good enough get me there? If not, then I need to fix something. I need to make sure that I'm either changing how we're sampling or somehow supplementing that, whether it be with secondary research, something so that I'm not just going with the good enough and checking a box like Michaela talked about earlier. It can't be a checkbox. The other thing is, how do you distinguish when you don't have that diversity? So clearly, I'm a guy. I'm just like, and so I'll get research like, hey, we want to understand why women are watching whatever show. I don't know, but what I have learned is I don't need to be the one who knows that, right? I'll talk to someone. I can call a Kerry, I can call Lisa, I can call someone who actually has more experience in that and say, hey, can you check my work for me to make sure that I'm not just living in my world of being me, right? And I'm not leaving something on the table. And I think, to Lisa's point, having the humanity behind these numbers or the completes is really helpful, because in thinking of this as, I'm going to be talking about people are individuals, they don't all behave the same. I'm going to need a gut check to make sure that I'm not classifying them as a monolith, just so that I can confirm whatever bias I have. And then the last piece is like, for those times where I've had clients actually tell me, well, we need to understand multicultural, so let's leave out the white folks. And they feel like that is the way to get to it, right? You look at everybody except for that group. And to be honest, it's actually kind of the opposite. You need to understand across everyone, right? And that misconception of it kind of being a zero-sum game, it even happens within sort of the different groups. Like, oh, this is for multicultural. Well, we only have enough money for Hispanic, so we're not going to do Black this time. Or we only have enough for Black, and we're going to leave so-and-so out. Or we're going to do multicultural, but we got to leave the white folks out. Like, it's not a zero-sum game, but many times we treat it that way. And so it's, at least for my team and what we've been doing, it's really fighting the urge to play in a zero-sum world, right? Realizing that there's a lot of interconnectivity between all of those pieces, and that we need to be able to understand how they're interacting and how they're either influencing one another or potentially how they're not influencing one another, where there could be potential opportunities to connect, right? That's sometimes where the goal is. And you see groups that are totally separate, but doing the same thing that you can potentially bring together and create something greater.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting, to that exact point in studies I've done, Damion, I think some of the concern on the client end in doing what they call multicultural research, although I personally believe at this point, all research should be multicultural research. That is America. So that's a whole other bandwagon, right, for another panel. But in that vein, I think there's a lot of fear that there will need to be multiple different strategies. And to some degree, that's true, certainly. But I think what happens when we make sure we include everybody either equally represented or represented at a high degree in our sampling frame or however we've done our recruitment, one of the things they learn is where there's actually like some universality to how people think, where there's that humanity we talked about earlier, that actually your white audiences might have a lot of the same positive receptivity to some of these quote multicultural themes that you're putting forward, and they're not resistant to it. They actually love it and believe in it and support it, and you're never going to learn that and assuage those fears if you don't ask.
Exactly. That universality is, I think, a big piece that we don't touch. And the fear of having multiple strategies. A lot of companies have multiple strategies already. They have two segments that buy the same product, so they're bifurcating their strategy already. What you may find is that there might be a way to change that and actually unify those strategies if you looked at everyone.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, this is all great commentary. I think it starts with just being really honest with ourselves, right? We all have bias, and we have to destigmatize that, acknowledge that it exists, and work to mitigate and correct it. And to me, as I've reflected over the last, 15 and a half months of being in quarantine, maybe it's longer than that now, I kind of lose track. But, I got really introspective during that time, as I'm sure all did. And it's really about not just talking about it, but really walking the walk. There are material things that you can do today to have a positive impact and move towards, really embracing diversity and inclusion in your research and being more representative. And I think there's forums like this are incredible. I want to give Melanie and Art and Jen and the rest of the IA team and the Idea Council major props for putting this together. I think it's so important. And I know all of us here really appreciate the opportunity to share ideas and really learn from each other, because listen, I don't know what I don't know. And there are certain things that I just don't have the personal life experience or agency to have a perspective on. I need other people to help inform how I should think about certain things. There are gaps in our knowledge and our experience just of who we are, and that's okay, right? That's totally normal. We just have to be okay with it, leave our ego at the door and say, I can learn from Kerry, I can learn from Candance, I can learn from Damion on things that I just maybe haven't had visibility or exposure to. And that's just going to make me a better researcher and more consultative to the clients that I work with. But, you know, getting back to material things that you can be doing today, I got to give props to Kerry. I love her surveys. If you ever look at one of her surveys, they are all nested quotas, okay? 3-4 variables deep.
You're the only one that loves that.
I know. Anyone else that's listening in that's on the sampling side is like, that's so hard. But you know what? It's necessary. It's needed if you really want representative results, making sure that you have that readable base, making sure that the screener is doing the work for you and really putting participants through their paces to ensure that you have the right audience and that you really do have representative results. And I think in terms of just, you know, the sample space, getting back to that, it's very saturated. There are a lot of different options for buyers out there, and not all sample providers are equal. We all have different methodologies that we're employing, different recruitment campaigns that we're running. And so I think it's important, if you are a buyer of online people, that you meet with your sample provider and ask them, what are you doing internally and externally on DEI? You know, get documentation from them. If they don't have documentation on their strategy around multicultural insights and representation, there's a problem. That should be your first red flag. And so I think it's just about really having those open, honest conversations and finding folks that are really consultative, and not as much as in a perfect utopic world, you would rely on a sample provider to do that heavy lifting. I think making the assumption that they've got it covered is really dangerous. And so you've got to sort of get in the driver's seat, make sure your surveys are well designed so that you are really producing those representative results and not forced to do tons of waiting on the back end. So.
Yeah, exactly. So that's the call to action for sample providers. Make the investment. There are people willing to spend the money. You got to make the investment to meet the feasibility. So Candance, I do want to hear from you, and then Simon is going to join us to wrap up and ask a couple final closing questions. So while Simon, why don't you put your camera on and join us while Candance is answering?
Great. Well, I mean, everybody touched on amazing options. I mean, going back to a solution that I think even Damion mentioned a little bit, which was the intent behind the work that we're doing. I was speaking on this earlier, and the only thing I feel like that we haven't said is addressing the existing diversity issues within your own firm before trying to do too much through research that, you know, your teams and the leaders around those might not even be ready to accept and or change or implement. Sometimes there are necessary changes that are needed to be made in diversity of thought issues, like depending on the levels and the hierarchy in the firm, who's allowed to speak up, chime in on an email, come to a meeting and say their piece without feeling like they're being reprimanded for being too young in the organization, for being brave enough to, you know, challenge an approach or a thought. And same with age, like someone coming in young, knowing that there's a lot of seniority in the company. What are their options? Is there room to grow? Or because everyone's settled in their roles, there's no matriculation and growth. And or, you know, gender identity, sexual orientation, salary equity, we want to focus on it all, but we can't do it all. I'm just saying, in regard to our own research teams, how are we making sure that, you know, our teams are holding ourselves accountable and making sure that we're working with our cross-functional teams in that way. So we're healing those spaces. Anything that deals with healing and growth starts from within, and then it's shown on the outside, and from the mind puts together, you know, with action to make the change. So, you know, put that first, and then secondly, and I would say most importantly, again, like start earlier, you know, recruit and think about creating opportunities. Gen Z more than any other generation. I mean, I have younger siblings, they're Gen Z, and I thought I wanted truth and transparency more than anything. But those guys are very, very adamant about telling the truth and having ways to see their opportunities before they even walk into a situation. And examples of recruitment companies I've worked with when I was considering staying within corporate America and a 9-to-5 job before starting my own business. Just to have the freedom and finally the opportunities I felt like I deserved was, before that, was working with agencies that did ability first hiring interview practices outside of experience based. You know, I didn't have my master's, but I have years of experience and way more internships than a lot of people that I could say has beat out other people for chief marketing officer jobs that I've turned down because I was able to show through ability that I could run this organization in that space. And imagine more interview processes like that, or even at a smaller scale, blind submitting resumes, taking away names so they are not biased from the jump from an interview, seeing things that might not feel like a Gen Pop name first or last. And how do we take an approach to just make little steps like that every single day? And that might not be within your own firm, I mean, within your own department at your firm, but how can you just work more closely with those who have those hats?
Absolutely. Thank you. Simon, do you want to ask a couple questions before we close?
Well, first of all, thank you. This has been a really, really good discussion, and you know, it's amazing just how you've brought clarity to the whole issue. And so, congratulations to you and to MIC, which I definitely want to know more about. McKinsey some time ago published a study that very definitively showed that the companies with diverse boardrooms, both in terms of gender and in terms of ethnicity, outperform those that do not have diversity at the top by about 15% in terms of profitability, which is, you know, and in fact, if that's just on gender alone. If you put race into it, it actually goes up above 20%. And you know, there's also other data. I just finished a few months ago the book Invisible Women. You've probably read it, which is absolutely horrifying in terms of the data that is missing about women. And I think there's a potential here for us as an industry to actually start thinking about the data that is missing about various different groups. You know, just reading that book and realizing that a huge proportion of the products we use and the services we use are based around the average white male. And even worse, some of them are based around white male astronauts. I mean, for God's sake. So my question, I guess, to the group, and particular groups such as this, is what do you think we can do to publicize or collect and analyze and publicize data that shows the economic impact of the missing data of various groups? You know, Michaela, who I mentored at university, by the way, it's wonderful to see her mentoring everybody else. But, you know, how do we actually prove to companies that, hey, you know, if you're not talking to Spanish dominant households, you're missing out on this much. Or if you're not designing products for various segments, you are missing out. You are missing out economically. And I'm going to stop there because otherwise it'll be a rant.
That's a big question. Anybody want to take a first stab?
Yeah, I think there's I think of the McKinsey study that was recently done about the impact of African Americans in entertainment and how there's, you know, I think they said like $10 billion literally every year just being left on the table because they're not paying attention to that audience, right? I think it's more studies like that. It's things that are, I think the first step in that is actually just deciding to do that work. That's probably been one of the most difficult pieces, because in doing so, you have to justify it. You have to talk about spending the money. And then you have the questions of people asking, yeah, but on my return, what am I going to get? They want to see the immediate dollars for it. Like, I know that I spent this and we're going to change this one thing and suddenly I'm going to make $1 million more a week, right? That's kind of the difficulty in it. Whereas what that type of work requires is more of a long-term view and understanding the overall impact. How do you execute against it? And looking at things both as at an industry level as well as an corporate individual corporation level. And so I think doing more studies like that is the first thing. But then I think there are also opportunities similar to what we're doing with the MIC, where individually our companies couldn't take on the types of studies that we're doing, but together we could. And so having that collaboration across researchers is really important. For some reason, there's this interesting competitiveness amongst researchers sometimes that at points doesn't make sense, when it would actually really behoove us to work together. I mean, we don't need to set out to prove that I'm smarter than you. Why don't we use those advantages and those skills that we all have to work together? And I think that's been one of the reasons why MIC has been great, because we've been able to tackle really big, meaty questions in a way that we couldn't do it individually. And so I think with those two types of approaches, we can start getting there and getting closer to taking those pieces and identifying where the missing links are.
Yeah, I think it was a really great response, Damion. The only thing I would add to it is just, it's all about socializing that information, right? It's great if you have the data and you can prove the ROI, but if it's not heard, then it's, it's not heard. And so again, working with associations like the Insights Association and really helping to spread the word and educate people is an absolute must.
Yeah, that's huge. And I think in socializing, it's not just telling people the numbers that you found out, but what I've found to be most impactful is after you do that, putting it into practice and then bringing back the results. That's where you really start to see change, because people are, oh, that's really great, it's data. But when you can bring back results and you've done something, suddenly everyone's like, I want that too. And then you start to see the ball really roll.
Yeah, you have to create FOMO.
Yep.
Yeah.
Great FOMO. That's a good note to end on. Well, thank you, everybody. I know we ran a little bit long, but this was really good. And we could probably sit here for like another hour and debate all these questions at length. This is a great topic. Thank you, everybody, for being here today. And I'm going to kick it back to the Idea Council and the IA to wrap us up. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Kerry and MIC. Fantastic conversation to wrap up the day. I took literally 4 pages of notes today with all of the information, thoughts, ideas, chat references. So thank you all for attending. Thanks for the presentation. Sherry and I were supposed to wrap up with like a recap. We will be here until 7:30 Eastern time with like a full recap. I just have a couple nuggets and I'll pass it to Sherry of different things that I heard throughout the course of the day. One thing I heard kind of throughout the day was this idea of mentor-mentee allyship. So I'll just that was kind of an interconnected thought throughout the course of the day. A big word and one of my favorite words when it comes to this idea concept is intentionality, being intentional in many directions surrounding inclusion, diversity, equity, access. I love Lisa's commentary when like be real. And I've heard Chikaya, I'm not sure if she's on anymore, but we've discussed that before in our Idea Council meetings. Just a ton of information. Actually there were several questions for the MIC, which I copied from chat, and maybe I can send that post forum to the MIC and we can get some responses so that we can share with the attendees at the Insights attendee site on the Insights Association webpage, so we can get that answered. So with that, I'll turn it over to Sherry.
All right, thanks, Damon. Yeah, for me, the whole issue of mentoring was a big topic that I took away as well, because so many of our presenters talked about that and the importance of that and how helpful that can be. So that was one of the comments that, or one of the big ideas that stood out to me today too. Also from the earlier sessions, the video from the, I'm going to say, fictional character of Kyle, who I think represents the experiences of so many insights professionals of color. And that was really powerful for me. I was able to relate to that. I know other people were as well from the comments that we saw in the chat. And another stat that stood out to me from that presentation was that 20% of people of color are thinking of leaving the industry because of negative experiences like that. So I am, again, really happy to be a part of this Idea Council and think that we had a great first day with the forum. And I'm glad that we're able to bring these types of conversations to the industry. And I am hopeful that all of the attendees were able to take something away. I know people are busy and it looks like we've had a really good number of participants for most of the day. So that's great to hear. And I would encourage you, if you haven't already, to join our LinkedIn group, as Melanie mentioned earlier, for the Idea Council, and I'll put that back in the chat. And if you haven't taken the survey that went out over the last few weeks, please do that if you're an Insights Association member. And I know some non-members received it as well. So please look for that and please tune in tomorrow. And I think with that, we'll wrap up. I'm really glad that everyone was able to join today.
Thank you, everyone. See you tomorrow.
Thank you.
Thank you guys. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.